Let's pull back the curtain on Nebraska's death chamber and take a hard look at the faces of those four condemned men who took their final breaths under state supervision. Harold Lamont, Walking Willie Otey. Harold Lamont, Walking Willie. Otey became Nebraska's first execution in 35 years when they strapped him into Old Sparky on September 2nd, 1994. Otey was 43 years old and had spent 16 years on death row for a crime that shook Omaha to its core. On that fateful summer night back in 1977, Otey broke into the home of 26-year-old Jane McManus, an Omaha photography student and waitress. What happened next was the stuff of nightmares. Otey sexually assaulted her, robbed her, and then brutally murdered her, stabbing her, bashing her head with a hammer, and finally strangling her to death with a belt. The scene outside the penitentiary on execution night was absolutely wild, more like a twisted carnival than a somber occasion of justice. Nearly 1,500 people showed up, divided into pro- and anti-death penalty camps, separated by makeshift snow fences. They screamed obscenities at each other, lit firecrackers and sparklers, and some even crowd-surfed as midnight approached. The atmosphere was electric, and not just inside where Otey would soon meet his fate. For his last meal, Otey requested the standard prison fare of spaghetti, the same dinner served to all the other inmates that evening. But when the actual time came, his appetite had vanished and he refused to eat. As the guards led him to the execution chamber, Otey declined to make any final statement. The man who'd once boasted and swaggered through his trial went silent when faced with his mortality. At 12:40 a.m., the executioner threw the switch. 4 jolts of electricity later, Harold Lamont Otey was pronounced dead. He became the 250th person executed in America since the death penalty's reinstatement. John Joseph Joubert IV. John Joubert's name still sends shivers down the spines of parents in Nebraska. This former Air Force radar technician stationed at Offutt Air Force Base committed crimes so heinous they're hard to even discuss. In 1983, Joubert abducted and murdered 2 young boys in Nebraska, 13-year-old Danny Joe Eberly and 12-year-old Christopher Walden. The boys were bound, tortured, and stabbed multiple times. Evidence later connected him to a similar murder of a boy in Maine. It was the stuff of parents' worst nightmares, a killer specifically targeting children. On July 17, 1996, Nebraska fired up the electric chair for the second time in the modern era. Unlike the circus atmosphere of Otey's execution, the crowd outside was smaller, around 700 to 800 people, though still raucous with protesters and supporters alike, shouting and waving signs. Before his execution, Joubert ordered his last meal with care: pizza topped with green peppers and onions, strawberry cheesecake, and black coffee. When given the chance to speak his final words, Joubert chose a path of contrition, saying, "I just want to say that again I am sorry for what I have done. I do not know if my death will change anything or if it will bring anyone peace. And I just ask the families of Danny Eberly and Christopher Walden and Richard Stetson to please try to find some peace and ask the people of Nebraska to forgive me. That's all." Like Otey before him, Joubert's execution required 4 separate jolts of electricity. Later court documents revealed the grim reality of electrocution. Joubert developed a 4-inch blister on the top of his head and blistering above both ears. Death by electricity ain't pretty, folks. Robert E. Williams. Robert E. Williams earned his spot on death row for a 3-day, 3-state rampage of terror in 1977. This 61-year-old murderer killed 2 Lincoln women, Patricia McGarry and Catherine Brooks, and also shot and killed Virginia Roe in Iowa, adding sexual assault to his list of crimes. A Minnesota woman survived being raped and shot by Williams during the same spree. By the time Nebraska executed Williams on December 2nd, 1997, the state had learned some lessons from the previous midnight executions. This time, they scheduled it for 10 in the morning, resulting in a much smaller and more subdued crowd of only about 80 people outside the prison walls. What stunned witnesses most was Williams's demeanor as he faced death. Media observers were shocked to see him smiling as he was strapped into the electric chair. Williams appeared serene, almost joyful. His final words reflected this eerie calm as he declared, "I'm on my way home." Williams had become religious during his nearly 20 years on death row, and witnesses reported he seemed genuinely at peace with his fate, as if eager to begin the journey. Even Wayne Earl Rowe, who had discovered his murdered wife back in '77, was present as a witness and seemed affected by Williams' tranquility in his final moments. Just like the two executions before him, Williams required 4 jolts of electricity. Witnesses reported seeing smoke rising from his leg and the top of his head after the 3rd jolt, a disturbing reminder of electricity's brutal effects on the human body. Carey Dean Moore. 21 years passed before Nebraska executed another inmate. The electric chair had been declared unconstitutionally cruel by the state Supreme Court in 2008. The legislature even abolished the death penalty entirely in 2015, only to have voters reinstate it the following year through a referendum. Carey Dean Moore, a 60-year-old who'd spent an astonishing 38 years on death row, became the state's first execution by lethal injection on August 14, 2018. Back in the sweltering summer of 1979, the 21-year-old Moore had robbed and shot 2 Omaha cab drivers, Reuel Van Ness Jr. and Maynard Helgeland, 5 days apart. The scene outside the prison was drastically different from the executions of the 90s, just a small gathering in the rain reflecting how much times had changed. Inside, a novel 4-drug cocktail awaited Moore, including the powerful opioid fentanyl, marking the first time this drug had been used in an American execution. For his last supper, Moore shared a meaningful meal with his twin brother David and close friends the night before. Pizza Hut pizza with bacon, beef, cheese, and mushroom toppings, washed down with Pepsi, followed by strawberry cheesecake for dessert. Moore had become deeply religious during his decades behind bars and spent his final hours discussing faith with his spiritual advisors. When asked for any final words, Moore simply referred to a written statement he'd prepared earlier, saying, "Just the statement that I hand-delivered to you already about my brother Donnie and the innocent men on Nebraska's death row. That's all that I have to say." In that written statement, Moore apologized to his younger brother for leading him down the wrong path and claimed several men on death row were innocent. As the lethal drugs flowed into his veins, Moore was able to turn and mouth the words, "I love you," to us, and then he turned up and looked up, and his lips were moving. Witnesses believed he was praying in his final moments. The execution took 23 minutes from start to finish, and Moore was pronounced dead at 10:47 a.m. The execution didn't go without controversy. For one thing, a German pharmaceutical company tried desperately to prevent its drugs from being used to kill Moore, filing lawsuits that ultimately failed. And during the procedure, prison officials lowered the witness curtain after administering the final drug, preventing observers from seeing Moore's reaction to the deadly chemical, a move that raised questions about transparency. The aftermath. These 4 executions span almost a quarter century and tell a larger story about how Nebraska and America has wrestled with capital punishment. From the electric chair to lethal injection, from midnight executions with carnival atmospheres to morning procedures with subdued crowds, the evolution reflects our changing relationship with state-sanctioned death. Nebraska currently has 11 men sitting on death row, some who've been there for decades. Will there be a 5th execution? Only time will tell. But the stories of these 4 men, Otey, Joubert, Williams, and Moore stand as stark reminders of the ultimate power we grant our government, the authority to take a human life as punishment for crime. Whether you see these executions as justice served or barbaric acts unworthy of a civilized society, one thing's crystal clear. Nebraska's 4 executions since '76 weren't just clinical procedures. They were intensely human moments where the condemned faced their end, chose their final meals, spoke their last words, and made their peace with what awaited them beyond the execution chamber.